The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. Judge Margaret Harrison's voice was ice, cold, final. In her 23 years on the bench, she'd built a reputation that lawyers whispered about in courthouse hallways. The Iron Lady. Fair, but absolutely merciless. David Peterson stood at the defendant's table, his shoulders shaking, not from fear, from something worse, desperation. He tried one more time to plead his case, his voice cracking as he explained that his daughter was only 6 years old, that she had leukemia, that the medicine he took wasn't for him, that she would die without it. But Judge Harrison's wheelchair creaked as she leaned forward, and her response was unwavering. "This court has heard your circumstances," she said. "They are tragic, but this court does not make exceptions for tragedy. If we did, we wouldn't have laws, we'd have chaos." And that's when the courtroom door opened with a loud creak. Every head turned. A small figure walked down the center aisle, slowly, deliberately. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wearing an oversized donated dress that dragged on the courthouse floor. Her head was completely bald, not a single hair, and dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. An IV port was visible on her thin arm, covered with a cartoon bandage. She looked like a ghost. The judge demanded to know who let that child in, snapping at the bailiff that this was a closed proceeding. But the little girl's voice was surprisingly strong. "I let myself in," she said. She walked right up to the bench, her small shoes echoing in the dead silence. The judge softened slightly, trying to explain that the child needed to leave, that her father's case was over. But the little girl interrupted. "You're going to send my daddy to jail." It wasn't a question. The judge confirmed it. Yes, he broke the law. The little girl tilted her head. "He was trying to save my life." The judge began to explain that she understood, but the child cut her off again. Do you really understand what it's like to be dying? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Judge Harrison stared at this sick child standing before her bench. For just a moment, just a flicker, something passed across her face. Pain. Old pain. She ordered the bailiff to escort the child out, but the little girl spoke again. "I can help you?" Judge Harrison froze. "Excuse me?" The little girl stepped closer, her huge eyes, too big for her hollow face, locked onto the judge's. "I can see it in you. The pain. It's not just your legs, is it?" Judge Harrison's face went white. "How did you?" she started, but couldn't finish. The little girl placed her small, cold hand on the judge's arm. "I don't know how I know things. I just do. You've been in that wheelchair for 4 years. Car accident. But that's not the worst part." The judge's voice shook as she ordered the child to stop talking. But the little girl continued. "The worst part is what you lost in that accident. Your daughter." The judge's shout rang through the courtroom. "I said, stop." Several people jumped. But the little girl didn't flinch, didn't step back. She just kept looking at the judge with those enormous, knowing eyes. "I'll make you a deal, Judge Harrison." Margaret Harrison found herself unable to look away from this dying child. "What kind of deal?" "Don't send my daddy to jail for 30 days. Just 30 days. If at the end of that time I haven't helped you walk again, then you can send him away for twice as long. 36 months instead of 18. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. The prosecutor started to object, saying this was absurd, but Judge Harrison held up her hand for silence. She was staring at the little girl like she'd seen a ghost. "You're saying you can make me walk?" "No," the girl shook her head. "I'm saying I can help you remember how." "That makes no sense," the judge said. "My spine was severed in 3 places. According to 7 different doctors, I will never walk again." The little girl smiled softly. "Doctors told my mommy I'd be dead 6 months ago. But I'm still here. Sometimes doctors don't know everything." David Peterson rushed forward, trying to stop his daughter from making promises she couldn't keep. But the little girl, Emma, told him to be quiet. She looked at her father with such mature certainty that he stopped mid-sentence. "I know what I'm doing," she said. Judge Harrison gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Every logical bone in her body was screaming that this was insane, impossible. A sick child making magical promises. But something else, something she'd buried deep for 4 years, whispered differently. What if? She took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. 30 days, she finally said. Mr. Peterson, your sentencing is postponed for 30 days. If at the end of that time, this court finds that your daughter has not fulfilled her promise, you will serve 36 months in county jail instead of 18. Do you understand? David looked like he might pass out. Your Honor, you can't seriously, he started, but the judge cut him off. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. The judge ordered the bailiff to release Mr. Peterson into his own recognizance and declared court adjourned. The gavel came down. As people filed out of the courtroom in shocked whispers, Judge Harrison sat alone at her bench, staring at the small handprint Emma had left on her arm. For the first time in 4 years, Margaret Harrison felt something in her left leg. A tingle. Probably nothing. Definitely nothing. Right? But as she sat there in the empty courtroom, the afternoon sun streaming through the high windows and casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor, she found herself wondering, what if that tingle meant something? What if this sick little girl with her impossibly wise eyes really could see something that 7 doctors and 4 years of physical therapy had missed? Margaret wheeled herself back to her chambers, her mind racing. Her clerk, a young woman named Jennifer, who'd worked with her for 3 years, was waiting with a stack of files for tomorrow's docket. Jennifer's eyes were wide with questions, but she knew better than to ask. Judge Harrison had a reputation for keeping her personal life separate from her professional one. Completely separate. So separate that most people who worked in the courthouse didn't even know she had lost a daughter in the accident that paralyzed her. They knew about the wheelchair. They knew about the drunk driver who ran a red light and T-boned her car at 60 miles per hour. But they didn't know about Sarah. They didn't know that her 7-year-old daughter had been in the back seat, wearing her seatbelt like always, carrying her backpack with her homework inside. They didn't know that Sarah had died instantly while Margaret survived with a severed spine and a guilt so heavy it felt like drowning. Jennifer placed the files on Margaret's desk and left quietly. Margaret sat alone in her chambers, staring at the framed law degree on the wall. She had earned that degree 30 years ago. Fresh out of college and full of idealistic dreams about justice and fairness and making the world a better place. Those dreams had evolved over the decades, shaped by reality and experience, and the countless cases that taught her that the world was far more complicated than she'd imagined. She'd learned that sometimes good people did bad things, that sometimes bad people had good reasons, that justice wasn't always about right and wrong, but about consistency and predictability and maintaining social order. She'd built her career on these principles. She'd become known for them, the Iron Lady, unmoved by tears or pleas or sob stories, and she'd been proud of that reputation until 4 years ago. Until the accident. Until Sarah. The call came at 2 a.m. Margaret jerked awake in her bed, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. A woman's voice, shaking, identified herself as Linda Peterson, David's wife, Emma's mother. Margaret's heart lurched. Is Emma all right? There was a long pause. No. She's in the hospital. She collapsed tonight. The doctors say she has maybe 72 hours. Her body shutting down. The phone nearly slipped from Margaret's hand. But in the courtroom, she seemed, Margaret started, but Linda interrupted. She was using everything she had left to stand up, to talk, to make that promise. Linda was crying now. Judge Harrison, my daughter is dying, but for some reason she believes she can help you. I don't understand it. The doctors don't understand it, but she believes it. Margaret felt something crack in her chest. What are you asking me? Come see her, please. Tomorrow morning. She keeps asking for you. Margaret wanted to say no, wanted to hang up, wanted to forget she'd ever made this insane deal with a dying child. Instead, she heard herself say, I'll be there at 8. She lay awake for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom. The same bedroom she'd slept in for 15 years. The same bedroom she'd shared with her husband before he left, 2 years after the accident. Unable to handle her grief and anger, and the way she'd shut him out completely. The same bedroom where she'd cried herself to sleep for months after Sarah died. until she finally decided that crying solved nothing and locked all those emotions away in a place so deep she sometimes forgot they existed. But tonight, lying in the darkness at 2:30 in the morning, those emotions were clawing their way back to the surface. And Margaret didn't know if she had the strength to push them back down. St. Catherine's Hospital smelled like antiseptic and despair. Margaret wheeled herself through the pediatric oncology ward, passing rooms full of sick children. Some were laughing, playing with toys. Others just stared at walls with hollow eyes. Room 347. Margaret paused outside, her hand on the door. Through the small window, she could see Emma lying in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped rhythmically. Linda sat beside her, holding her daughter's hand. Margaret pushed the door open. Emma's face lit up, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Judge Harrison, you came." "I told you I would," Margaret said, wheeling closer to the bed. Up close, Emma looked even more fragile than she had in the courtroom. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Emma admitted. "But that's okay. I need to talk to you about something important." Linda squeezed her daughter's hand, suggesting she should rest, but Emma shook her head. "Mom, I'll rest later." Her voice had that same strange certainty it had in the courtroom. She looked at Margaret. "Do you want to know why I knew about your accident?" Margaret's throat tightened. "How could you possibly?" she started, but Emma interrupted. "I see things. I don't know why. Maybe because I've been close to dying for so long, I can see things other people can't." Emma shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "In the courtroom, when I looked at you, I saw everything. The car accident, the truck that ran the red light, the way your car spun, the hospital, the surgeries, and..." She trailed off. "And what?" Margaret whispered. "And I saw your daughter in the back seat." The world stopped. Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. Linda looked concerned, asking if the judge was okay. "My daughter died in that accident," Margaret's voice came out broken. Raw. She was 7 years old. Sarah. She died instantly. Emma nodded slowly. "I know, and you blame yourself. Every single day. You think if you'd driven a different route, or left 5 minutes earlier, or noticed the truck sooner, she'd still be alive." Tears were streaming down Margaret's face. "How do you know this?" "Because that's what your body's been trying to tell you," Emma said. "Your legs don't work because you don't believe you deserve to walk. You think walking away from that accident when your daughter didn't makes you guilty. So your body gave you what you thought you deserved, a punishment. That's not medically possible," Margaret protested. "Your doctor said your spine healed wrong, but what if it didn't? What if your spine healed fine, but your mind won't let your body remember how to use it?" Margaret stared at this dying 6-year-old who somehow understood her better than any therapist ever had. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your body is waiting for you to forgive yourself." Emma reached out and took Margaret's hand. Her skin was cold, paper thin. "And I'm going to help you. But you have to help me first." "Help you? How?" Emma's eyes were starting to close. She was fading, fast. "My mommy keeps praying for a miracle to save me. But I already know," she yawned. "My miracle isn't getting cured. My miracle is helping you walk again before I go. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's why I'm still here." "Emma, don't talk like that," Margaret started. But the little girl was already asleep, her breathing shallow and labored. Linda walked Margaret out into the hallway. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Judge Harrison, I need to tell you something. The doctors gave Emma 3 months to live. That was 8 months ago. They can't explain why she's still here, but Emma keeps saying she's waiting. She won't say what for. Until yesterday in that courtroom." Linda grabbed Margaret's hand desperately. "Whatever she's doing, whatever she sees in you, please let her try. Please. If it gives her purpose in her final days, please." Margaret looked back through the window at the sleeping child, who'd somehow seen straight into her soul. "I'll come back tomorrow," Margaret promised. What she didn't say was that she didn't believe in miracles, but maybe, just maybe, she wanted to. Margaret drove home slowly, her specially modified van navigating the familiar streets of her small city. She'd lived here her entire life, grew up 3 blocks from the courthouse where she now presided, went to elementary school with kids whose children now appeared before her bench. This city was in her blood. Every street corner held a memory. That coffee shop where she'd studied for the bar exam. That park where she'd taken Sarah to feed the ducks. That intersection where a drunk driver had destroyed everything. She pulled into her driveway as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her house was a modest 2-story colonial that she'd bought when Sarah was born. She and her husband had planned to fill it with children, planned to host birthday parties and holiday dinners and create the kind of warm, loving home neither of them had growing up. But after the accident, after Sarah died, after her husband left, the house became something else entirely, a mausoleum, a place to exist rather than live. Margaret had kept Sarah's room exactly as it was the day she died. Backpack by the door, homework on the desk, stuffed animals arranged on the bed. For 4 years, Margaret had opened that door every single morning and every single night, standing in the doorway and staring at the frozen shrine to her daughter. She never went inside, never touched anything, just looked and remembered, and felt the guilt crush her chest all over again. That night, Margaret found herself standing in Sarah's doorway again. But this time, something was different. Emma's words kept echoing in her mind. Your body is waiting for you to forgive yourself. Margaret had spent 4 years convinced that her paralysis was physical, permanent, irreversible. 7 doctors had confirmed it. The MRI images showed the damage clearly. Severed spinal cord, no nerve communication between brain and legs, medically impossible to repair with current technology. She would never walk again. Every doctor had said the same thing, and Margaret had believed them, had accepted it as her punishment for surviving when Sarah didn't. But what if Emma was right? What if the prison wasn't her spine, but her mind? What if she'd been so consumed by guilt that she'd locked herself in this wheelchair, not because her body couldn't walk, but because her soul refused to let her? Margaret wheeled herself into Sarah's room for the first time in 4 years. The air smelled stale and dusty. She moved slowly to the bed and picked up Sarah's favorite stuffed animal, a worn purple elephant named Mr. Snuggles. Sarah had slept with this elephant every night since she was 2 years old, had cried when they accidentally left it at a hotel during vacation, had brought it to the hospital when she got her tonsils removed. Margaret held the elephant against her chest, and finally, for the first time since the funeral, let herself remember Sarah not as a tragedy, but as a person. A real, living, laughing little girl who loved peanut butter sandwiches and hated broccoli, who wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because she loved animals so much, who gave the best hugs and always said, "I love you, Mommy," before bed, who was smart and funny and kind and everything beautiful in the world. Margaret cried. She cried harder than she'd cried since the funeral. She cried until her chest hurt and her throat was raw and there were no more tears left. And when she finally stopped, when the sun was starting to rise and the birds were beginning to sing outside, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. Not happiness, not joy, but something close. Something that felt like maybe, possibly, she might someday be okay. She wheeled herself back to her bedroom and slept for 3 hours, the deepest sleep she'd had since the accident. When she woke up, she knew exactly what she needed to do. She needed to see Emma again. Day 7. Margaret had visited Emma every single day. They never talked about walking or healing or miracles. They just talked. Emma told stories about her favorite cartoon characters. Margaret told stories about cases she had tried. Emma drew pictures with crayons. Margaret did crossword puzzles beside her bed. And slowly, imperceptibly, something was shifting inside Margaret. She found herself smiling at Emma's silly jokes. Found herself looking forward to their daily visits. Found herself thinking less about what she'd lost and more about what she still had. The ability to listen, the ability to connect, the ability to matter to this dying child who had somehow decided that Margaret was worth saving. On day 7, Emma asked if Margaret had thought about Sarah at all that week. Every day Margaret answered, but how? Happy memories or sad ones? Margaret thought about it, both. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike. I haven't let myself think about that in 4 years. Emma smiled. That's good. Remembering the happy parts doesn't mean you're forgetting her. It means you're keeping her alive. You sound like you're 40 years old, not 6, Margaret said. My mom says, I'm an old soul. Emma coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Margaret's heart clench. When she caught her breath, she said, "Judge Harrison, can you do me a favor? Anything. Try to stand up." Margaret's hands tightened on her wheelchair arms. "Emma, I can't. We've been through this." "My spine," she started, but Emma interrupted. "Your spine is fine. Come on, just try." "For me." "I physically cannot," Margaret protested. "You won't know until you try." Against every logical thought in her brain, Margaret gripped the arms of her wheelchair. She took a deep breath, and she tried to push herself up. Nothing. Her legs were dead weight. "See? I told you," Margaret started. "Again." Emma insisted. "Emma, this is pointless. Again." Margaret tried again. Nothing. Tears of frustration burned her eyes. "Emma, this is..." she started, but Emma commanded her to close her eyes. "Close your eyes and picture Sarah. Picture her happy. Picture her telling you it's okay." "I can't," Margaret said, but Emma insisted. "Do it." Margaret closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw Sarah, not trapped in a twisted car, but laughing, running, alive. And she heard Sarah's voice. Whether real or imagined, she didn't know. "Mom, it's okay. I'm okay. You can let go now." Something broke open inside Margaret's chest, a dam she'd built from 4 years of guilt and grief and self-punishment. She pushed against her wheelchair arms, and she felt her left leg move, just barely, just a twitch. But it moved. Margaret's eyes flew open. "Did you see?" she started. Emma was grinning from ear to ear, despite her exhaustion. "I saw." "Do it again," Margaret tried. Her left leg moved again, stronger this time. "Oh my God," Margaret breathed. "Oh my God, it's actually..." She couldn't finish. The hospital room door burst open. A nurse rushed in, looking panicked. "Mrs. Peterson, you need to come now. Your husband. There's been an accident." David Peterson had been hit by a car. He was crossing the street on his way back from the pharmacy, carrying Emma's pain medication, when a drunk driver ran a red light, the same way Margaret's life had been destroyed 4 years ago. David was in emergency surgery. Touch and go. Emma sat in her wheelchair in the ICU waiting room, hooked up to a portable oxygen tank, staring at the surgery doors. Margaret sat beside her in her own wheelchair. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Emma whispered, "If my daddy dies, they're going to put me in foster care. I don't have any other family." Margaret's heart shattered. "Emma, your father is strong. He's going to..." she started, but Emma interrupted. "But what if he doesn't? What if I lose him? What if I end up alone?" Margaret didn't have an answer. Hours passed. Finally, a surgeon emerged. His scrubs were covered in blood. He looked around for Mrs. Peterson, but Linda had stepped out to call family. "Is there family here for David Peterson?" Emma wheeled herself forward. "I'm his daughter." The surgeon knelt down. His eyes were kind but exhausted. "Sweetheart, your daddy made it through surgery, but he's in a coma. We don't know if he'll wake up." Emma nodded slowly. "Processing. Can I see him?" "Of course." As the surgeon wheeled Emma toward the ICU, Margaret felt something surge inside her. Rage. Not at the drunk driver, not at fate, at herself. Because she'd given David Peterson 30 days. She'd held his freedom over his head as a condition for a miracle. And now he might die without ever getting to hold his daughter again outside of a jail cell. This was her fault. Margaret gripped her wheelchair and pushed herself up. Her legs shook violently. Her muscles screamed. But she stood. For the first time in 4 years, Judge Margaret Harrison stood on her own 2 legs. She took one step, then another. Then she stumbled and caught herself on the wall. A nurse gasped, "Ma'am, you're walking." Margaret didn't care about the miracle. She cared about getting to Emma. She stumbled down the hallway, leaning on walls, her legs barely holding her weight, but she kept moving. She found Emma in the ICU, sitting beside her father's bed, holding his hand. David was unconscious, breathing tube down his throat, monitors beeping. Emma was crying silently. Margaret stumbled into the room and knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. "Emma," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't made that stupid deal, your father would have been home safe and..." She couldn't finish. "It's not your fault," Emma whispered. "Bad things just happen sometimes. That's what my mommy always says. But I used your miracle as a bargaining chip. I treated it like a game. I didn't believe, Margaret said, but you believe now. Emma looked at Margaret's legs, at the way she was standing, even though it clearly hurt. You walked to find me. That means you believe. Margaret started crying. Emma, I don't care about walking. I care about you. I care about your father. I want you both to be okay. Emma smiled softly. Judge Harrison, do you know what a miracle really is? What? It's not magic. It's not impossible. It's just people loving each other so much that they become stronger than they thought they could be. Emma squeezed her father's hand. My daddy loved me enough to steal for me. You loved your daughter enough to punish yourself for 4 years. And now you love me enough to walk again. Margaret pulled Emma into a hug, sobbing into the little girl's bald head. I don't want you to die, Margaret whispered. I know, but Judge Harrison, that's not the miracle we're doing together. The miracle is that even if I do, you're going to remember me, and you're going to walk to my funeral, and you're going to keep walking for the rest of your life. And every time you walk, you'll remember that a little girl who couldn't save herself still saved you. Over the next week, Margaret learned things about Emma she'd never known. She learned that Emma loved strawberry ice cream but hated chocolate, that her favorite color was purple because it reminded her of royalty, and she liked to pretend she was a princess, that she'd never been to Disneyland but had watched every Disney movie at least 10 times, that she was afraid of the dark but pretended she wasn't because she didn't want her mother to worry, that she knew she was dying but wasn't scared of death itself, only of leaving her parents alone. Margaret spent hours sitting beside Emma's hospital bed, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding her hand in comfortable silence. And during those hours, Margaret began to understand something profound. Emma wasn't healing her legs. Emma was healing her soul. Margaret had spent 4 years believing she didn't deserve happiness because Sarah was dead. She'd locked herself in a prison of grief and guilt, refusing to let anyone in, refusing to feel anything except pain. The wheelchair had become a symbol of that prison, a physical manifestation of her emotional paralysis. But Emma, with her childish wisdom and unflinching honesty, had shown Margaret that punishment wasn't the same as penance, that surviving didn't require suffering, that loving Sarah's memory didn't mean destroying her own life. Margaret began attending physical therapy sessions at the hospital, working with Emma's doctors to strengthen her legs. The therapists were amazed by her progress. In just 2 weeks, she went from barely being able to stand to taking supported steps down the hallway. The head therapist told her he'd never seen anything like it. Your neural pathways are reconnecting at an impossible rate, he said. It's like your brain suddenly remembered how to send signals to your legs. Margaret knew it wasn't her brain that had remembered. It was her heart. Emma's condition worsened rapidly after her father's accident. The stress and exhaustion had pushed her fragile body past its breaking point. By day 15, she was sleeping 20 hours a day. By day 20, she could barely speak above a whisper. Linda stayed by her side constantly, singing lullabies and reading picture books and holding her daughter's hand. Margaret visited every day, sometimes staying for just an hour, sometimes staying all night. They rarely talked now. Emma was too weak, but Margaret would sit beside her bed and tell her about physical therapy, about how many steps she'd taken that day, about the plans she was making for her after Emma was gone. I'm going to establish a foundation, Margaret told Emma on day 23, in your name, to help families like yours who can't afford their daughter's medical care, to make sure no parent ever has to choose between saving their child and breaking the law. Emma smiled weakly. That's good. That's really good. Her voice was barely audible. You're going to help a lot of people, Judge Harrison. You're going to save a lot of daddies. Margaret took Emma's small hand. You already saved one daddy, and you saved one broken judge who forgot how to live. Emma's eyes were closing. Before she drifted off, she whispered, Promise me you'll walk to my funeral. Promise me you won't use the wheelchair even if it hurts, even if people stare. Promise me. Margaret's tears fell onto Emma's hospital blanket. I promise, sweetheart. I promise. Day 30 arrived. The courtroom was packed. News crews lined the back wall. Every seat was filled. People stood in the aisles. Everyone had heard about the miracle deal. Judge Margaret Harrison sat at her bench in her wheelchair, looking out at the crowd. But this time, David Peterson wasn't sitting at the defendant's table. He was still in a coma. Emma was in the front row, her mother beside her. The little girl was so weak she could barely hold her head up. An oxygen mask covered half her face. The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, it's been 30 days. Mr. Peterson's daughter has not fulfilled her promise. In fact, his medical status makes it impossible for him to even attend this hearing. I move that we proceed with sentencing in absentia. Per our agreement, the sentence should be 36 months. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Margaret looked at Emma. The little girl was staring at her with those huge eyes, one hand pressed against her chest as if she was in pain. Margaret took a deep breath. "Before I render my decision," Margaret said, her voice carrying through the courtroom, "I'd like to tell you all a story. 4 years ago, I was in a car accident that killed my daughter and left me paralyzed. Doctors told me I'd never walk again, and I believed them. Not because my spine couldn't heal, but because I didn't believe I deserved to heal. I punished myself for surviving when my daughter didn't. I built a prison in my own body." She paused. 30 days ago, a 6-year-old girl with leukemia looked me in the eye and promised she could help me walk. Most of you thought she was delusional. Some of you thought I was cruel for making a deal with a dying child. But Emma Peterson saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She saw that my paralysis wasn't physical. It was spiritual. It was grief and guilt and shame made manifest. Margaret gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Emma didn't heal my spine. She healed my heart. And in doing so, she reminded my body how to work. The courtroom was dead silent. So let me be very clear. Emma Peterson fulfilled her promise. She stood up from her wheelchair. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Margaret stood on shaking legs, gripping her desk for support. She'd been practicing in secret for 2 weeks, with physical therapists who couldn't explain her progress. And because she fulfilled her promise, Margaret continued, now walking slowly around her bench. All charges against David Peterson are permanently dropped. Furthermore, I am establishing a fund to cover all of Emma's medical expenses for the remainder of her life, however long that may be. People began to applaud, but Emma didn't smile. She was staring at the judge with tears streaming down her face. Linda looked at her daughter in concern. "Baby, she did it. She walked. You were right." But Emma was shaking her head. Margaret saw the little girl stand up from her chair. She'd insisted on not using her wheelchair today and walk slowly toward the bench. "Judge Harrison," Emma said, her voice barely audible even in the silent courtroom. "Can you come down here? I need to tell you something." Margaret carefully made her way down from the bench, her legs still unsteady. She knelt in front of Emma. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma leaned in close and whispered in Margaret's ear. "I lied to you." Margaret pulled back, confused. "What?" "I can't heal people. I never could." Emma's tears were flowing freely now. "But I knew you could heal yourself. You just needed a reason to try. So I lied. I made you a promise I couldn't keep, because I knew it would make you want to prove me wrong, or prove yourself wrong. I don't know. I just knew you needed a push." Margaret stared at this impossibly wise, dying child. "Emma, she started, but Emma interrupted. "I'm sorry I lied to a judge. I know that's bad, but I'm not sorry I helped you, because you can walk now, and when I'm gone, you'll keep walking. And maybe sometimes you'll walk for me, since I couldn't." Margaret pulled Emma into her arms and held her tight. "You didn't lie," Margaret whispered fiercely. "You promised to help me walk, and you did. The method doesn't matter. The miracle still happened." Emma sobbed into Margaret's shoulder. "I don't want to die, Judge Harrison. I'm scared." "I know, baby, I know." They stayed like that for a long moment, a judge and a dying child, holding each other in a courtroom full of witnesses. Finally, Margaret pulled back and looked Emma in the eye. "Emma Peterson, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, would you let me adopt you?" The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps and whispers. Linda shot up from her seat. "What?" Margaret stood up and faced Emma's mother. "Linda, I know this sounds insane, but David is in a coma and may never wake up. You're struggling to work and care for Emma and pay for her treatments. If Emma becomes my legal daughter, she'll have access to the best medical care in the country. She'll have a trust fund. She'll have stability. And when, Margaret's voice broke, when the time comes, she'll have someone with her who loves her. Linda looked between Margaret and Emma, tears streaming down her face. You don't even know us, Linda whispered. I know enough. I know Emma saved my life, and I want to spend whatever time she has left showing her that her life mattered, that she mattered. Emma looked up at her mother. Mommy, can I? Linda knelt down and cupped her daughter's face. Baby, are you sure? Judge Harrison is basically a stranger. No, she's not. She's my friend. And I don't have much time left, Mommy. I don't want to spend it in a hospital with strangers. I want to spend it with someone who understands. Linda looked at Margaret, really looked at her, saw the desperation and love and grief and hope all mixed together. If David wakes up, Linda started, then we'll figure it out together, Margaret promised. But right now, Emma needs stability, and I need her just as much as she needs me. Linda closed her eyes and nodded. Okay? Yes. Okay. The courtroom exploded in noise, some people cheering, others objecting, reporters shouting questions. But Margaret only had eyes for Emma. She held out her hand. Ready to come home? Emma took her hand and smiled. Ready. As they walked out of the courtroom together, a woman who'd forgotten how to walk and a child who was running out of time, nobody knew that they only had 17 more days together. But those 17 days would be filled with more love, more laughter, and more living than most people experience in a lifetime. Margaret transformed her home to accommodate Emma. She hired a live-in nurse named Patricia, a kind woman in her 50s who had spent 30 years working in pediatric oncology. She converted Sarah's room, after carefully packing away all of Sarah's belongings with Linda's help, into a bright, cheerful space filled with Emma's favorite things. Purple curtains, stuffed animals, a television that played Disney movies on repeat, fresh flowers delivered every other day. Linda visited daily, spending hours with Emma, reading to her, singing to her, holding her hand. Margaret never felt threatened by Linda's presence. She understood that Emma had two mothers now, and that was a beautiful thing, not a complicated one. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Emma's favorite time of day was late afternoon, when the sunlight streamed through her bedroom window and created patterns on the walls. Margaret would sit beside her bed, and Emma would tell her stories, not about being sick or dying, but about imaginary adventures, about being a princess in a castle, about flying on a dragon, about having tea parties with talking animals. Margaret learned to see the world through Emma's eyes, to find magic in ordinary moments, to appreciate the simple joy of existence. On day 34, Emma asked Margaret to take her to the park to feed the ducks, the same park where Margaret used to take Sarah. Patricia helped them prepare, bundling Emma in warm clothes, even though it was a mild autumn day. Emma was so weak now that Margaret had to push her in a wheelchair, though Margaret herself walked the entire way without any assistance. They sat by the duck pond for hours, tossing breadcrumbs and watching the ducks swim in lazy circles. Emma's laughter, weak and breathless, was the most beautiful sound Margaret had ever heard. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, approached them shyly. She stared at Emma's bald head with open curiosity. Her mother tried to pull her away, embarrassed, but Emma smiled at the girl. "It's okay," Emma said. "I have cancer. That's why I don't have hair." The little girl thought about this seriously. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes," Emma said. "But right now, I'm feeding ducks with my friend, so right now, I'm happy." The little girl nodded, satisfied with this answer, and skipped away. Margaret marveled at Emma's grace, her ability to make others comfortable even in her dying, her gift for finding joy in the present moment, regardless of what the future held. On day 38, David woke up from his coma. The hospital called at 3 in the morning. Margaret and Linda rushed to his bedside, leaving Patricia with Emma. David was confused and disoriented, barely able to speak around the breathing tube they were removing. His first coherent words were, "Where's Emma?" Linda took his hand. "She's safe. She's with Judge Harrison." David's eyes widened in panic. The sentencing? The deal. "I have to go to jail now." Linda squeezed his hand. "No, honey. The charges were dropped. You're free." David started to cry, tears of relief and confusion streaming down his face. I don't understand." "What happened?" Margaret stepped forward. "Your daughter happened. She saved both of us. And now she's waiting for you to get strong enough to come see her." David's recovery was faster than anyone expected. Within 3 days, he was walking with assistance. Within a week, he was ready to be discharged. Margaret arranged for him to stay in her guest room so he could be close to Emma. The first time David saw his daughter after waking up, he broke down completely. Emma was so much weaker than when he'd last seen her. So much smaller, so close to the end. But her smile when she saw him was radiant. "Daddy," she whispered, "you came back. I'll always come back for you, baby girl. Always." They spent the next 9 days inseparable. David slept on a cot in Emma's room, waking every time she stirred, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she wasn't in pain. Linda continued to visit daily. The four of them, David, Linda, Margaret, and Emma, became an unlikely family bound together by love and grief, and the knowledge that their time was running short. On day 45, Emma had a good day. The best day she'd had in weeks. She was alert and talkative, her eyes bright, her smile genuine. She wanted to watch The Little Mermaid, her favorite movie, and she sang along to the songs in a whisper-thin voice. Margaret made her favorite lunch, strawberry ice cream with whipped cream and rainbow sprinkles. Emma ate 3 whole spoonfuls, more than she'd eaten in days. That evening, Emma asked if everyone could gather in her room. David and Linda sat on one side of her bed. Margaret sat on the other. Emma looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady and knowing. "I want to tell you all something," she said. "I'm not scared anymore. I was scared at first, scared of dying, scared of leaving you. But I'm not scared now." David started to protest, but Emma shook her head. "Daddy, it's okay. I've done what I was supposed to do. I've helped Judge Harrison walk again. I've brought all of you together. I've made my life mean something." Linda was crying. "Baby, your life means everything." Emma smiled. "I know, Mommy, and I want you to know something. When I'm gone, I want you to be happy. I want you to remember me, but I don't want you to be sad forever. Promise me you'll be happy." Linda couldn't speak, so she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Emma turned to David. "Daddy, promise me you'll help Judge Harrison with her foundation. Promise me you'll help other sick kids." David's voice was choked. "I promise, baby girl, I promise." Finally, Emma looked at Margaret. "Judge Harrison, promise me you'll keep walking, not just with your legs, but with your life. Promise me you'll leave your wheelchair in the past where it belongs. Promise me you'll help people the way you've helped me." Margaret took Emma's small hand. "I promise, sweetheart. I'll walk every day. For you, for Sarah, for everyone who can't." Emma smiled, satisfied. "Good, that's good." She settled back into her pillows, suddenly exhausted from the effort of speaking. But there was peace on her face, a calm acceptance that Margaret recognized. Emma slept for the next 2 days, barely waking even to take sips of water. The hospice nurse warned them that the end was very close. On day 47, a Tuesday morning, Emma opened her eyes one last time. The room was filled with gentle sunlight. David was holding one hand, Linda was holding the other. Margaret was sitting at the foot of the bed, one hand resting on Emma's leg. Patricia stood in the doorway, quietly bearing witness. Emma looked at Margaret and smiled weakly. "Judge Harrison?" "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for walking with me." Margaret's tears fell onto the blanket. "Thank you for teaching me how." Emma's eyes closed, her breathing slowed, and then, peacefully, gently, she let go. The funeral was held on a bright Tuesday morning. Hundreds of people came, many who'd never even met Emma, but had heard her story. The service was held at First Baptist Church, a beautiful old building with stained glass windows that scattered colored light across the congregation. Emma's small white casket was covered in purple flowers, her favorite color. Linda had chosen to keep the casket closed, wanting people to remember Emma as she was, full of life and joy, not as she looked at the end. Margaret walked into the church on her own 2 feet. She walked down the center aisle, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. She walked past rows of people who stood in respectful silence. She walked to the front of the church where Emma's casket waited. She placed one hand on the smooth white surface and closed her eyes. "You gave me back my legs, Margaret whispered. "But more than that, you gave me back my life. You reminded me that grief doesn't have to be a prison, that loving someone isn't erased by losing them, and that miracles aren't about defying the laws of nature, they're about remembering the laws of love." She took a deep breath. "So I'm going to keep walking, Emma, every single day. For you, for Sarah, for everyone who can't. And every step I take, I'll remember that a 6-year-old girl with no hair and no time left still found a way to heal a broken woman." Margaret walked back down the aisle, her legs steady, her heart broken, but somehow whole at the same time. Behind her, the casket remained closed, but if Emma could have seen it, she would have smiled, because the miracle was never about walking. It was about a woman learning to live again, and that miracle would last forever. 1 year later, David Peterson woke up from his coma. Actually, he had woken up much earlier, on day 38, but the full weight of what he'd missed only hit him a year after Emma's death. He stood in Margaret's living room, looking at the photos on the wall. Photos of Emma feeding ducks, Emma laughing, Emma surrounded by stuffed animals, Emma living fully in her final days. "I missed it," David said quietly. "I missed her last days." Margaret came to stand beside him, "But you were there when it mattered most. You came back. You got to hold her. You got to tell her you loved her. That's what she needed." David nodded, tears in his eyes. "What do I do now? How do I live in a world without her?" Margaret put a hand on his shoulder. "You live for her. You make her life mean something. You help me build this foundation so other fathers don't have to make the choice you made." David looked at her. "You really meant it? About the foundation?" Margaret smiled. "Construction starts next month. The Emma Peterson Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research. I've already secured $5 million in funding. We're going to change lives, David. We're going to make sure Emma's miracle reaches far beyond the two of us." David wiped his eyes. "I'm in. Tell me what to do." And so began the next chapter. Margaret and David worked tirelessly on the foundation. Linda joined them, bringing her organizational skills and her deep understanding of what families facing pediatric cancer truly needed. Together, they created something beautiful, something that mattered, something that would ensure Emma's brief life had endless ripples. 5 years later, Judge Margaret Harrison walked her first 5-kilometer race in honor of Emma. The event was called the Emma Peterson Memorial Run, and over 2,000 people participated. Margaret, now in her early 50s with streaks of gray in her hair, stood at the starting line wearing a purple shirt with Emma's face printed on it. She no longer needed a cane. She walked freely, confidently, gratefully. The race began. Margaret started running slowly, her pace steady and deliberate. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to honor, to remember, to celebrate. 2 hours later, long after the winners had crossed the finish line, long after most participants had gone home, Margaret crossed the finish line alone, dead last, exhausted, triumphant. A small crowd of volunteers cheered as she raised her arms in victory. She had finished. She had walked the entire 5 kilometers without stopping. She had kept her promise to Emma. After the race, Margaret visited the cemetery where Emma was buried. She placed fresh purple flowers on the grave and sat down in the grass beside the headstone. "I did it, sweetie," Margaret said softly. "I walked for you today, and I'll walk again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of my life." She traced Emma's name on the headstone with one finger. "You know what I've learned? The miracle you gave me wasn't really about my legs. It was about remembering that life is worth living even after loss. That love doesn't end when someone dies. That purpose can be found in the darkest moments. That sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving most." Margaret stood up, brushing grass from her pants. She walked back to her car, where David was waiting. He'd run the race too, finishing in the middle of the pack, respectable for someone who'd spent months in a coma 5 years ago. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Margaret confirmed. They drove to the foundation's main office, a beautiful modern building on the edge of town. Inside, 30 employees worked tirelessly on research grants, family support programs, medical equipment donations, and policy advocacy. The foundation had already helped over 500 families, had funded 3 major research projects, had changed laws in 2 states to protect parents who made desperate choices to save their children. Emma's face smiled from a portrait in the lobby. Forever 6, forever wise, forever remembered. Margaret stood in front of that portrait at the end of every workday, just for a moment, saying a silent thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for teaching me that miracles are real. That night, Margaret walked through the park where she used to take Sarah, and later Emma, to feed the ducks. The park had installed a memorial bench with a plaque that read, "In memory of Emma Peterson, who taught us that love is stronger than fear." Margaret sat on that bench and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. She thought about Sarah, about Emma, about all the children who'd been taken too soon. And she made a choice, the same choice she'd been making every day for 5 years. She chose to keep walking, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, purposefully. She chose to let love be stronger than grief. She chose to honor the dead by living fully. She chose to believe that even the shortest lives can create the longest legacies. How would you feel if you were in Margaret's position? If you lost someone you loved and carried that guilt for years? Would you have believed Emma when she made her promise? Would you have taken that leap of faith, knowing it might break your heart all over again? These are questions we all face in different ways. We all carry losses. We all build prisons out of pain. And we all have the choice, every single day, to either stay locked inside those prisons or to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone or something can help us find the key. Margaret chose to believe, not because it was logical, not because it made sense, but because a dying child looked at her and saw not a broken judge in a wheelchair, but a whole person who just needed to remember who she was. And maybe that's what we all need sometimes. Someone to see us, really see us. Not the version we show the world, not the armor we wear, but the scared, hurting, hoping person underneath. Emma saw Margaret, and in being seen, Margaret found her way back to herself. Think about the people in your life, the ones who are struggling, the ones who seem fine, but might be building their own prisons out of pain. Can you see them? Really see them? Can you be the person who reminds them that miracles aren't impossible? That healing isn't about fixing what's broken, but about remembering what was always whole underneath? Margaret walks every day now. Sometimes she walks through the park where she and Emma fed the ducks. Sometimes she walks through the courthouse halls where lawyers still whisper about the Iron Lady who learned to soften. Sometimes she walks to Emma's grave and tells her about the lives the foundation has touched. And every single time she walks, she remembers. She remembers that love is stronger than fear. That hope is more powerful than despair. That sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving most. Emma couldn't save herself, but she could save Margaret. And in saving Margaret, she saved everyone Margaret would go on to help. The sick children who receive funding through the foundation. The families who found hope when they thought there was none. The lawyers and defendants who walked into Margaret's courtroom and found not an Iron Lady, but a woman who understood that justice without compassion isn't justice at all. That's the real miracle. Not that Margaret walked again, but that Emma's love created ripples that spread far beyond her short life. Ripples that are still spreading today. Ripples that will continue long after Margaret is gone. Because that's what love does. It doesn't end when the person dies. It transforms. It becomes something larger than itself. It becomes legacy. Emma's legacy wasn't measured in years. It was measured in moments. In the moment she stood up in that courtroom and made an impossible promise. In the moment she told Margaret the truth about her dead daughter. In the moment she confessed that she'd lied, not to deceive, but to heal. In the moment she died, surrounded by people who loved her, having fulfilled the purpose she somehow knew she was meant for. What's your legacy going to be? What ripples are you creating right now, in this moment, with the choices you make and the love you give or withhold? You don't have to be a dying child or a grieving judge to create miracles. You just have to be willing to see people, to love them, to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. That's all Emma did. She saw Margaret. She loved her. She believed in her. And it changed everything. So, here's my question for you. Who in your life needs to be seen right now? Who needs someone to believe in them? Who needs to be reminded that they're not broken, just hurting? And are you willing to be the person who does that for them? Because that's what this story is really about. It's not about supernatural healing or courtroom drama or even about death and loss. It's about the choice we all have, every single day, to either build walls or build bridges, to either stay locked in our prisons or to reach out and help someone else find their key. Margaret chose bridges. Emma chose bridges. And because of those choices, both of their lives meant something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Your life can mean something that big too. Not by doing extraordinary things, but by doing ordinary things with extraordinary love, by seeing people, by believing in them, by reminding them that miracles aren't rare. They're happening all around us all the time. We just have to be willing to look. Margaret looks every day. She looks at the children in the hospital beds and sees not patients but fighters. She looks at the defendants in her courtroom and sees not criminals but human beings who made mistakes. She looks at herself in the mirror and sees not a woman who lost her daughter and her legs, but a woman who was given a second chance by a 6-year-old girl with more wisdom than most adults ever achieve. And she walks. Every single day she walks. For Emma, for Sarah, for everyone who can't. And every step is a miracle. Not because walking is impossible for her anymore, but because every step is a choice to live instead of just exist, a choice to love instead of just survive, a choice to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. That's the miracle Emma gave Margaret, and it's the miracle Margaret is trying to give you right now, through this story. The miracle of choice, the miracle of hope, the miracle of believing that even when everything seems impossible, love can make a way. So choose. Choose to see people. Choose to love them. Choose to believe in miracles. Not the supernatural kind, but the everyday kind. The kind that happens when someone shows up for someone else. When someone tells the truth, even when it's hard. When someone forgives themselves for things they couldn't control. When someone decides that today is the day they stop building prisons and start building bridges. That's the miracle. And it's available to you right now. Not in 30 days, not tomorrow, right now. All you have to do is choose it. Margaret chose it, Emma chose it. And their story proves that when we choose love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation, we don't just change our own lives, we change the world, one step at a time, one choice at a time, one miracle at a time. So walk, not because you have to, but because you can. Walk for the people who can't. Walk for the people you've lost. Walk for the person you used to be and the person you're becoming. Just walk. And remember that a 6-year-old girl with no hair and no time looked at a broken judge and saw not what was wrong, but what was possible. And she loved her enough to help her see it too. That's what we're all looking for, isn't it? Someone to see not what's wrong with us, but what's possible in us. Someone to love us enough to help us see it ourselves. Be that person for someone today, and let someone be that person for you. Because that's how miracles happen, not through magic, not through the impossible, but through love. Always through love. That's Emma's gift. That's Margaret's gift. And now it's your gift too, if you choose to accept it. So, what's it going to be? Are you going to walk, or are you going to stay sitting down? The choice, as always, is yours. Before you go, if this story touched you in any way, if it made you think or feel or remember something you'd forgotten, do something for someone today. Not because I'm asking you to, but because someone in your life needs it. Someone is building a prison out of pain right now. Someone is forgetting how to walk, literally or figuratively. Someone is waiting for permission to believe in miracles again. Be the person who gives them that permission. Share this story if it helped you. Tell someone about Emma and Margaret. Remind them that healing is possible, that hope is real, that miracles happen when love is stronger than fear. And then, go walk. Walk for Emma. Walk for Margaret. Walk for yourself. Walk for everyone who can't. And remember, with every single step, that you're not just moving forward, you're creating ripples. Ripples of love and hope and possibility that will spread far beyond anything you can see or measure. That's your legacy. That's your miracle. That's your gift. So walk, and never, ever stop. Because somewhere, a little girl with no hair and enormous eyes is watching and smiling, knowing that her life mattered, knowing that her miracle is still happening, knowing that love really is stronger than fear, and knowing that you, right now, reading these words, have the power to be someone else's miracle. So be that miracle. Choose love, choose hope, choose life, and walk. Just walk. The rest will follow. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the very end. Now go, walk, and change the world.